Hello and a very warm welcome to everyone. I am Shrija Agrawal and welcome to Mint Startup Diaries. We have a pretty meaningful panel today, but before we dive in, it's time to do some context setting. Life is now easily a continuum, a straight line with periodic events which now look little different from one another. To our aid are available digital tools, the latest byproduct of the so-called digital transformation, which tell us what, when, how, where, who of almost everything that we do now in a repeat mode. Work, eat, read, shop, walk, exercise, entertain, play, pleasure, and so on. Never before has there been such an enhanced focus on the self, or say how we have been reduced to a commodity. The commodification of self would seem to be a misnomer. If a commodity is a product, something that can be bought and sold, then in what sense can the self be commodified? According to Joseph E. Davis, a research professor of sociology at the University of Virginia, there are two possible meanings of self commodification. According to him, the first is that self understanding is mediated by the consumptions of goods and images. This means that we know of who we are and we judge the quality of our inner experiences through identification with the things we buy. It's of no surprise that even in the pandemic, e commerce companies have had record sales. A second meaning of self commodification involves a reorganization of our normal lives and relationships on the model of market relations. This adaptation is well suited to understand the practice of personal branding, a strategy of cultivating a name and image of ourselves that we manipulate for economic gain. We are CEOs of our own companies, Me.Inc. To be in business today, our most important job is head marketer for the brand called You. You must have heard about the growing tribe of influencers. This is not only limited to adults, even kids are getting into this. Look at how edtech platforms are also milking this. Kids under 5 to 6 years are being labeled as world class coders. Welcome the world of social e commerce. But there's an entire gamut of people selling stuff over Facebook and Instagram. These are essentially mom and pop brands leveraging self commodification trade and selling stuff over social media platform. To understand more on this phenomenon called social e-commerce, please help me welcome two distinguished experts who have deep dived into the subject in their latest report. It's a great combination where we have a partner at a consulting firm and a veteran investor at a storied VC firm. Please help me welcome Radhika Sridharan, partner at Bain Company, and Mohit Bhatnagar, managing director at Sequoia Capital India. Radhika and Mohit, thank you so much for putting your time and energy to this. It's my sheer pleasure and privilege to welcome you to Mint Startup Diaries. My first question to you, Radhika, what really is social commerce? I would understand, and it bases my interview with Sachin Bansal many years back when he started. And I think a lot of initial work in the e-commerce or the digital e-commerce to understand has been done by these platforms called Flipkart or Amazon, for instance. They at least told India that you can actually shop digitally. They introduced something called cash on delivery for people who were not comfortable with the idea of paying digitally online payments. Then the groundwork for online commerce has really been done. The idea of buying something, not touching it physically, and we have had enough strides there, and meaningful companies have been built there. Social commerce seems to be the natural progression for e-commerce, if you will. Does it really only sort of mean adding a social layer on top of e-commerce, or does it go deeper than that? Help us decode this for the benefit of all our viewers and watchers.
Firstly, thanks so much, Shrija. That was a very interesting and thought-provoking context setting that you did up front. Great to be here with you today. I think you started to already set it up. When you spoke about the progression from e-commerce to social commerce, I think what we're talking about here now in the context of social commerce is something that builds on a lot of those fundamental principles, but also starts to talk to a really distinct set of needs And therefore, I've been asked by a lot of people whether social commerce either is a subset of e-commerce or whether it starts to take share from e-commerce. And I think neither of those two is the right way of looking at it. Honestly, I think social commerce starts to address a distinct set of human requirements, so to speak, and therefore also plays out very well in a different set of categories. And I think why we think this is very interesting now is because it's starting to open up a whole new set of categories and types of purchases that might have been challenging, in the past. So, for instance, if I pick up beauty and personal care, it's a big category on social commerce. It's social commerce itself is nascent, but BPC is one of the emerging categories. So it's everything from saying, I don't know how to use a particular product, but this influencer, teaches me how to use it, makes it desirable. Or there's something that I want to buy, it's from a brand that I'm not familiar with. Can I have a discussion with the seller on the other side to say, these are my specific problems, does this product meet those needs? And therefore, is it the right thing for me? It's not just about looking at a catalog with a sort of one-way flow of information and making a purchase. The other dimension, I would say, is also that, if you look at the two sides, there's the buyer side, which is what we just spoke about. But social commerce, I think, is also going to democratize the seller side. India is a very interesting country, obviously, in many categories like lifestyle, apparel, for example. There's a large number of small sellers who have distinct crafts, distinct areas of specialization in different parts of the country. A lot of these are not organized brands. And so it's not as if you could, as a buyer, know that this is the kind of standard product that this brand sells at this price point. But these sellers now, through the social commerce channels, are starting to be able to get their products out to a larger number of customers, tell them about what they're trying to sell, and really we see social commerce as being powered by small sellers. So that's the other dimension that makes us very excited. So there's innovation happening on the buyer side, but also the seller side is really about democratization of the small seller.
Thanks, Radhika, for that. Mohit, I come to you now. We just heard Radhika, and she said that while there's innovation on the buyer's side, it also empowers the sellers hugely. And she sort of gave the example that at the heart of it are basically the small and medium sort of business owners. I want to understand from you, Mohit. You represent a storied VC firm, and you have been in the business of investing for a while now. I know, what is it that are the telling signals, be it in your portfolio in India for Sequoia or globally, which are telling you that the time for social commerce has perhaps come in India? What really are those?
I'll pick two. There are many, but again, Shrija, thanks for having us both to discuss this important topic to you. In many ways, we think social commerce can be transformational for India in the impact that it can have over the next decade. The first thing I'll talk about the demand side is, today there are, call it, more than 500 million people who say good morning or good night on WhatsApp to each other and are truly completely on the mobile internet. But only 20% of them, call it about 100 million people, actually shop online. So there is a whole vacuum, a gap, if you will, of 400 million people who are on the mobile internet, using it for entertainment, using it for content, using it for communication, and are spending close to 3 hours plus every day doing those activities, but are not on commerce. So that's the first trend we saw within our portfolio companies, is just the massive adoption, massive engagement on the mobile internet, but the adoption and engagement of that universe for commerce was fairly low and represents a great potential. On the supply side, as Radhika said, there is an unprecedented level of digitization happening in the SMBs of India. Mom and pop shops, kirana shops, offline boutiques have traditionally run their businesses in a very manual way so far. But as the internet has caught the imagination of every Indian, they're now embracing the internet, the mobile internet more specifically, to try and sell online. The tools that they need in order for them to sell online, order management systems to deliver a good customer experience by actually shipping stuff to folks. These are new ideas and new technologies that they're only now adopting. And we were stunned when we saw a number of companies in our portfolio, like Khata Book and Pagar Book and other companies in India like OK Credit and others who have massive bases of millions and millions of SMBs that are actually adopting this technology so that they can improve the productivity and the efficiencies of their small businesses. So on one hand, you have consumers who are like the internet but haven't really bought on it yet. And on the other hand, you have all these suppliers who've embraced the internet with the digitization. We thought that's a perfect mix for having social commerce come alive. So that's probably the headline reason why we're so excited about it. Today, only about $35 billion worth of GMV, which is the cost of the products that people buy online. And of that, it's a very, very small number, maybe 1 or 2 billion, that is actually going on this social commerce trend. Looking forward, in the report you may have seen, we actually project that very soon, over the next decade, you'll actually see social commerce get much larger than today's e-commerce. And that's because of the distributed nature of what social commerce represents. There'll be millions of sellers online. There'll be hundreds of thousands of suppliers who actually support the sellers, and you'll be able to service the smallest towns and cities of India in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 with this social commerce. Because the current set of solutions for e-commerce or online e-tailing don't solve for trust, which is also pointed out in the report, where the single biggest reason that bank of 400 million people haven't jumped online to purchase yet is they're not sure how their credit card might get misused. They're not sure of the quality of the product that they might receive in their house 7 to 14 days later. And so that's where social commerce comes in to really try and build trust between the seller and the buyer in a distributed fashion.
Thanks, Mohit, for laying this out so well for us. So one can understand that solving for trust is really at the heart of the problem. And while there's supply side innovation, there's also innovations being on the demand side, right? And there is huge gap being met. I want to understand from you, Mohit, what really are the kind of different business models or monetization models that one can sort of envisage when one talks about social commerce?
Sure. I'm at the very heart of it, and I'll like to take it one step back, and then I'll answer your question. In India, on the mobile internet, there are two types of businesses. There are content businesses. There are community businesses. I should say maybe three types: content businesses, community businesses, and commerce businesses. The content businesses, have been putting out for many years, distributing their content, whether it's, user generated or premium content, out to their base of customers. So they're looking for business models and monetization models as to how do I monetize my existing base. Then there are communities that have got built on Facebook and many other platforms, and folks are looking to see how they can monetize their communities. And then there are commerce businesses who traditionally have just been, all about a transaction, but are looking for ways to actually use things like community and content to drive better engagement in their base of customers. The reason I laid it out as these three is historically they've been separate, but going forward we're seeing a lot of blurring happen between these three. And what I mean by that is content businesses are wondering how commerce can be a way for them to monetize, and commerce businesses are wondering how content can be a way for them to actually drive for higher engagement. And that's where social commerce plays into it, is when do you actually get communities and content companies to sort of understand commerce, and how do you get commerce companies to sort of understand communities? That's when the real power of social commerce comes alive. We feel like the business models are down to two, simplistically put. It's the commerce itself, which is the transaction that goes through. So depending on what you're buying or selling, there's a take rate that many of these companies benefit from. This is post paying for logistics, post paying for delivery, post paying for some of the back end payments. There's an efficient take rate that you would do at scale that makes it a very interesting business model. And then there's an element of advertising, if you want to call it that, which is if you're a small seller today, it is very hard for you to get discovered on a large platform like Amazon or Flipkart. You generally buy brands on those platforms, but it's very hard for a small little seller in Surat or a small little carpet manufacturer somewhere to get discovered on one of these large destination e-commerce sites. So they will use companies in the social commerce space, for example, a company like Meesho, which we are involved with, to try and get discovered on that. And in return for getting discovered, there'd be an advertising business model that they would then pay to a platform like Meesho in order for that discovery process to happen. So commerce and advertising.
Thanks, Mohit. I think that's sort of very well laid out. And I think it just sort of breaks down the entire thinking much better. I sort of come to you now, Radhika. We just heard from Mohit in terms of different kind of business models, and he sort of very categorically mentioned that largely there are two buckets. One is the content part of it or the advertising part of it, and there's the commerce part of the transaction part of it. I want to understand from you, in your report, you have really projected some very large numbers for social commerce and that to achieve in the next 5 years. So, are there any global comparisons, if you will, that India can perhaps follow for that exponential growth? And if at all there is, what really are the levers that one needs to put in place for this?
Yeah. So I think, firstly, I would say that we discussed the fact that social commerce actually is a fairly wide spectrum of different types of activities and behaviors. And I think as you look at the paths that other countries have followed, whether it's China or Southeast Asia, where social commerce has actually been developing for a while, it's our belief that those models are not necessarily going to be developing in exactly the same way in India. You'll see flavors of the same kinds of behaviors, though. And therefore, with that out of the way, there are a few examples that everybody talks about. Of course, one example that's particularly interesting that we've spoken about in the report as well is Pinduoduo, which is a group buying platform which is based in China. And I think one of the really interesting things about Pinduoduo is how they were able to dramatically increase the number of people who could effectively be targeted through online commerce of any sort, going much deeper into China, so going into lower tiers of cities where affordability was more of a constraint, and where you really needed to be very, very sharp on pricing. The way they were able to do that was because they had this group buying model in place that essentially said that if you buy one product, you get it at a certain price. But if you're able to aggregate a group of, let's say, 5 or 10 people, then you get a substantial discount. But if you think about it from the perspective of the platform itself, what that meant was instead of shipping one product and incurring a logistics cost to get it from, let's say, one of the main cities to a small interior part of China, you are now aggregating that across a much larger basket. And therefore, the economics work out for both. So it works out for the platform as well as for the buyer. Now, that was transformational because it obviously, like I said, opened up a much larger market. There are similar types of models that we're seeing starting to get built out in India. So the group buying concept has emerged here. Mall 91 is an example, for instance. But it's something that needs to, I think, get built out, in a more structured manner. Which then actually brings me to the second question, which is what do we see as being the key enablers to making this happen? I think one key enabler, of course, is going to be what happens in terms of logistics costs, shipment costs. This is a metric that we've been looking at over the past few years in India. Obviously, it's been coming down year on year as all of both the dedicated e-commerce platforms as well as third-party logistics providers built out a larger network, improved their drop densities, and so on. Costs have been coming down, but I'm sure Mohit will also, have a view on this. Logistics cost does remain one of the biggest areas that needs to be cracked. And I think as it's a little bit of, as demand gets built out, it means that in parallel, supply innovations will also happen to drive down that number. The second is, as you think about, if you think about the experience of buying on an e-commerce platform, for example, Flipkart, Amazon, you have a very seamless end-to-end experience for the customer, where they're able to discover products, find out more about them through the means of the catalog, make a payment, and then expect the product to actually get shipped to them without really too much of a fuss. So the customer, without having to leave the platform, is able to go through this entire series of steps and then complete their transaction. As we look at social commerce today, some of that end-to-end enablement of the commerce process has not yet happened. And that's because we're still in the early stages. And so you might well have, for example, product discovery happening on one platform. So the customer, let's say, is on Facebook, discovers products from a seller through a group, And then the seller says, to continue this conversation, come over to WhatsApp or a messaging platform. The transaction then gets completed there, but because payments are not yet integrated, or at least weren't until recently, you needed to then use a separate payment link, make a payment, or have a COD kind of construct. And then, of course, there was no efficient way for the seller to communicate to the buyer what the status of the shipment was. And if you think about the expectations that have now been built into all of us as consumers, you expect that when you're buying something online, you should be able to track its progress until it reaches you. That today, for example, is not universally possible because a lot of these service providers who sort of provide different parts of the commerce experience are disjointed. But again, these are starting to get built out in pieces. As if you were to look at Meesho, for instance, Meesho has solved for that integrated experience, and we believe that there will be more innovation that happens as the market opportunity in this space also opens up.
Thanks, Radhika, for this. I come to you now, Mohit. We have all seen this sort of play out in e-commerce 1.0, if you will. If social commerce is really being labeled as the next progression for online e-commerce, the digital commerce. And I remember, there's an entire line of VCs behind Flipkart and Snapdeal, but the modes of differentiation were very thin, right? One, as a consumer, could not figure out, was it in between the Flipkart or ShopClues or Snapdeal, for instance? Often, the one who had the maximum capital ultimately became the differentiator. In terms of product, very little differentiation. Almost the homepage of all the companies look similar. From a consumer's perspective, it was a great time. VCs were throwing discounts. It was all funded by them. So I think for them, the differentiation really was the bottom pricing. I want to understand the same phenomenon from when we talk about social commerce, at least from a consumer's perspective. The so-called influencers look similar to me from a distance. And if it's all about only coming on a Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp or a WeChat, we're leveraging the power of the big tech really here. And if you are distinguishing between one company to the other for investing, what really are the investable differences and how big or thick can they really be, the modes of differentiation for social commerce?
Shija, I think the first thing to appreciate is in order to deliver a very simple, no-brainer experience to a consumer, don't underestimate the amount of complexity that goes into the business and the operations to make that actually happen. Uh, if I look at a business like Meesho, for example, it is a non-trivial task to solve for a very diverse and a fresh set of selection every day so that your micro entrepreneurs who come to the Meesho platform every day are constantly going through a new catalog that is relevant to them at a price point that is relevant for them to sell and is at a quality that they are going to be proud of when their customers get it. And the ability to sort of do that all the way from Ladakh down to Tamil Nadu, catering to all the different tastes that India has and possesses, is a non-trivial task. As you go and build this business on the supply side, where your North Star is selection, you will realize that the moats you have to build on the supply side are considerable. First, it's actually just the diversity of the supply. Second is the quality management that you have to put in to ensure that the supply sort of meets your standards. Third is the geographical diversity you need to have in the supply so that the logistics times for it to reach a customer are within the right sort of set of frames. And all of this is changing every day, every week, as seasons come and go, as Diwali comes and goes, as different sort of fashion trends come and go. So this is a non-trivial task to actually build out the supply side, which will separate out the winners from the losers. The second thing I'll tell you is don't underestimate price to be a commodity. In order to do what Radhika said earlier is incredibly important. If you truly want to service the 400 million people who are online in India but are not online shoppers in India, the only way you can do it is if you can actually drop the price in a sustainable manner for your own business for them to come onto the internet platform to buy, because otherwise it's always going to be easy enough for you to go just to the roadside, the shop next to your house to go purchase the garment. The only reason you will do it online if it is much more convenient and at a price point that doesn't urge you to go out and go and feel the fabric and sort of have it delivered to your house 5 or 7 days later. So price is incredibly strategic. And how do these companies do it? It's with the scale that Radhika was talking about. Today most of India who is in tier 3, tier 4, tier, even lower, smaller towns, villages, is not buying online because of the trust factor that we spoke to earlier. If you bring millions of those consumers online through their friends and family who serve as the social influencers like you called it, the scale, the tens of millions of people that you now can get an aggregate demand from and then go get it serviced from your supplier side is non-trivial. That allows you to sort of drop the prices from the supply side, use things like contract manufacturing, and do things to actually ensure that you have the lowest cost product that is available to your micro entrepreneurs to go on and sell to the small towns and villages that sort of are looking for that price point. And the moment you succeed on that and whatever profits you make, you put that right back into the business and once again sort of drop price so that you can keep on trying to drop price to a point so that you can get the next slab of users to come join in here. So I'll point out two things to you, which is the supply side complexity for selection and the strategic nature of how do you sort of consistently keep dropping price of the products that are available on your platform so that you bring on new waves of consumers onto your platform. Very hard to do, easy to speak of.
Very hard to do, easy to speak of. And that brings me to the next question. Then, Mohit, perhaps take us through perhaps two or three key challenges, for instance, what Misho faced in its initial days to where it is right now, which could perhaps serve as practical examples for other startup founders who are watching this or listening to this.
Sure. I'll take this year's examples. There are many, but I'll just take this year's. You know, March, April of this year, COVID hits. We're in lockdown. Misho's service is non-essential, so their business comes to a grinding halt because you can't deliver anything to anyone. You're not allowed to. There's no one on the roads. There's no transportation. The team puts its head together and says, when lockdown comes out, when we come out of lockdown, how do we sort of deal with the situation? And they realize that because their sellers are all the small sellers, this is the group that will be under the most financial pressure if you think about it. So the level of churn of their suppliers, the financial viability of their suppliers was in great question this year in COVID, as you can imagine, with a lot of small businesses in India. The reaction from the Misho team was incredible. They essentially went out and said, how do we basically go make sure that we actually, enhance a supply base immensely to make up for all the suppliers that may actually not last or survive this financial cycle? How do we make sure that these different parts of the country come out of lockdown? My traditional Jaipur Razai supplier who was doing it for me for the entire country may be in lockdown. So how do I go diversify my supplier base to be now more regional in each state so that I can supply from everywhere to everywhere? So the sheer depth that Misho went into to actually move from a few suppliers that they were dependent on to a much larger variety of sub-suppliers and suppliers in each category and each subcategory is one big learning and one big challenge. Again, easy to talk about, but hard to sort of implement and execute. Maintaining the quality and the price point and the availability, non-trivial task. A second large challenge that is faced by the company this year is if you have micro entrepreneurs, millions of housewives who are using the Misho platform to convince their friends and families to buy from them. The single biggest thing they were worried about this year is I hope I'm not putting my friends and family into trouble when a package reaches them with all the COVID scare and paranoia all around. So how do you convince your micro entrepreneurs who are on your platform to see the level of hygiene and the sanitization that you're using in the warehouses that you use to make sure that these packages are going to be safe? To just give them the strength and the trust that they should not, stop their business, but carry on shipping through you to their friends and family. So these were two just simple examples of sort of building a very trusting community with the micro entrepreneurs during these tough crisis times in order for them to come back, even though your business had sort of stopped during the lockdown. And as a result of all of these and many other things that Misho has done, Misho is now at much higher levels of sales than pre-COVID levels, because the larger wave that has happened is more people are buying online than they were before we all started this COVID, in the pre-COVID world. So net beneficiary from everything in COVID, but there were hairy times and lots of hard work and lessons to be learned along the way.
Yeah, so the power of community is extremely strong, and we have really seen this in the pandemic come into its own, the community building. I want to sort of come to you now, Radhika, and how large can a social commerce company really become? And I ask you this question that, we all know about Amazon. It's called the everything store right now. There's not a single business which Amazon is not into practically. So really, I mean, how large can a social commerce business really be? And are these two different things, an e-commerce company and a social commerce company? What if tomorrow Amazon starts leveraging social media in a very, very big way? Because they have all the logistics support in the world, they have the knowledge, they have the wherewithal, and they have the capital.
I think this is an interesting set of future-gazing questions. To the first one, which is how large can a social commerce company be? I think if you were to go back to some of Mohit's previous responses as well, and say flip the question around a little bit and say, what does it really take to be a successful social commerce company? And to do that in a manner that is profitable to yourself, but also creates value for both the sellers as well as buyers on the platform. One of the big themes that came out of everything that Mohit said was really the point around scale. And scale in many different ways. The first is obviously, a large component of social commerce and why people come and buy is because they're able to discover new products that they may not necessarily be able to find elsewhere, or they're able to catch new trends early and so on, which naturally translates into making sure that you've got fairly wide assortment. You're continuously refreshing as well. The other component of scale was what we spoke about in the context of pricing. So obviously, it is the scale that enables you to drive down prices on the supply side. It is also the scale that enables you to drive down logistics costs, and that scale is a different type of scale. It is basically making sure that you've got local volumes that enable you to supply more efficiently. And so, in some sense, I would ask the question a little bit differently, which is, do these businesses actually benefit from achieving the kind of scale? And is there a little bit of a natural flywheel that gets built in, which is as you get bigger, you're actually able to deliver more value, and therefore you get bigger, and so on. If you were to ask me to put a number on it, I think that's where the crystal ball gazing comes in. But fundamentally, in terms of how the business operates and where value is created, this is how I would think about it. At this point, Mohit, I'd love to bring you in to see if you have a different answer on this one.
Yeah, look, it's always wrong to project in the future, given we really don't have a clue. But here are some guidelines, right? If you're doing $30 billion worth of sales today, we expect nothing less than $100 billion, in the next decade. If you have two very large companies that are worth tens of billions of dollars, when we last saw them getting priced, and we don't know what Amazon India really means internally because it's not a separate company. Then clearly, as you do a 3x in terms of the size of the market, you will see very, very large companies getting created. All you have to do is look at the US, the China, or look at frankly every country in the world, in these large markets which have a billion people in population like China. I mean, you have e-commerce companies that reach hundreds of billions of dollars worth of market cap. So this is an immensely attractive space for you to go build a company in the social commerce space. And frankly, Shrija, not just in the social commerce space, which is what we've been talking about, but all the adjacencies that come about from it as well, right? The set of challenges for a hyper-local logistics company, which is able to now deliver down to the smallest cities and towns in the cheapest way, like we've been making the point, may not be serviced by today's logistics partners. And they'll be solving a different problem. If the market is that large, it's important for you to understand there'll be segmentation in terms of users, in terms of vendors. And I think there are lots of opportunities for startups to get created, even in the adjacencies like logistics, like payments, and so on and so forth, to support the growth of social commerce.
So we have seen this play out in the first wave of e-commerce also. A lot of logistics companies got built out. You have examples of the likes of delivery also which got funded. A lot of payment companies got funded, a lot of spillover effect was seen. But I'm most excited about what Mohit just said, that perhaps the next e-commerce company will not be on the existing e-commerce companies that are out there. The next $100 billion commerce, the social commerce company. And I would like to see that if it is not Amazon, which is the future of e-commerce. And I wanted an answer to that. That's really interesting. And I think we spoke about quite a few things here. We spoke about opportunities. We spoke about perhaps the existing challenges or the existing gaps which need to be fulfilled to have exponential growth for social commerce. We spoke about the global parallels. We spoke about how China is doing it. Radhika also highlighted the fact that pricing plays a very important role. You gave an example of group buying side. Mohit took us beautifully through Misho and the various kind of businesses being built digitally, content, commerce, communities, and we spent quite a bit of time there. I think we have to not talk really about what really is being spoken so much in every tech conversation, perhaps, or every tech story that we read. I mean, there's a growing power of big tech and really sort of clubbing them as monopolies. When you talk about a Facebook or Google, and of course, WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook. When you have so many of these in the so-called mom and pop stores and coming on this wave of social commerce, essentially leveraging these large platforms, are we not making them all the more powerful than what they already are? I mean, they have negotiating powers in terms of, they take content from media websites, in terms of advertising, in terms of whatever they do, right? I mean, they are monopolistic. So in terms of going forward with social commerce, how critical do we factor in these risks, the risks of over dependence on these networks? That is one. And the second thing is that consumers from time to time go through this sentiment of tech lash, if you will. The entire thing of going against Facebook was a very big phenomenon. How do we factor some of these very, very credible and important risks which are there in the world of social? There can also be influencer fatigue, for instance, because there's so many influencers out there even now. I will begin with you, Mohit. Perhaps what is your answer? Because these are very large risks considering the potential investment in companies like this, and then get on to Radhika.
Sure. So first, one thing I have learned by doing 15 years of venture investing is nothing stands still. And as big as everyone or any one platform or any one company is, I can assure you that customers vote with their feet. And it is a matter of time for certain platforms that are incredibly powerful and engaging today get replaced with something else that the next set of millennials find even more engaging. And all you have to do is look back at the social networks and the social communities that you were using, say, 10 years back, 5 years back, and you'll see that change and that shift that's happened. So what we're talking about here is social commerce. It is basically the underlying point there is it doesn't matter on which platform these influencers and these communities get built, whichever platform they are on tomorrow. And we've seen new platforms like vertical platforms around fitness, for example, get created. We've seen large new platforms getting created on health, or we are seeing sort of segments like gamers get onto platforms like Discord and others. They will keep choosing new platforms, new technologies, new companies where they want to hang out on. And this social commerce phenomena will flow with them as the users move from platform to platform wherever they feel most comfortable to hang out and build their communities. Social commerce sort of follows them onto those platforms. So I just wanted to make that first point, saying at least my belief is it's a transient thing, that you're naming some of the companies that you are. Yes, they're very strong today. Yes, they have fantastic distribution today, and that's because their products are working for the consumers. But let me assure you, by being in the venture business, there are so many startups aiming their shots at all the existing large companies in order to sort of provide a better experience for our consumers to move there. So that's point number one. I think if you really ask me, the takeaway for your question really on social commerce is actually the opposite, which is social commerce truly is allowing for a democratization for small sellers. Small sellers are actually left out of the e-commerce revolution today. because only the large brands sort of sell online mostly today. But small sellers, as a result of social commerce, will actually be able to embrace the internet more fully, like we've talked about here today. So the biggest beneficiary of this is not going to be one or two companies. The biggest beneficiary of this is actually going to be the tens of millions of smaller businesses and wholesalers and fabrics and wholesalers and artisans and so on and so forth, who are going to come online for the first time and build their businesses online for the first time, that are going to be the real final beneficiaries. So one of the reasons we're most excited about the social commerce and why we put out this report together is I think it's good for India. I think India is going to see a fantastic set of livelihoods of people. Look at Misho as an example. The millions of housewives who actually wake up every morning to look at their Misho app to see what products and services they should personalize and then send to their friends and family is putting millions of housewives. And there's a great advertisement that they put out where the woman of the house is known as mom and known as wife and so on and so forth, but now she's known as the businesswoman, as a result of her sort of being able to earn her own livelihood sitting at home and being part of the mobile internet revolution. So I actually feel the democratization of SMBs and housewives coming online to build businesses is the headline that social commerce underlines.
Radhika, I want to take a stab at that. Mohit said that perhaps we should shift our focus and double on the fact that democratization of really the social commerce space in terms of getting small and medium business owners online, and perhaps what examples like Misho and all are doing it, huge beneficiaries. And he also alluded to the fact that the monopolistic or the very powerful platforms perhaps might not be the same 10 years from now.
Mohit spoke about the sellers who are now able to come online and who have access to much larger audience and potential customer base than they did. There's another layer in the middle. You spoke about influencers. You said, aren't people sick of influencers? I think what we're starting to see is the social commerce intermediation layer in some sense is creating space for not just your large influencers who might be organized and have followings, but really these small housewives that Mohit spoke about, for example, are just people who are, let's say, respected in their communities. You're building upon your existing social cachet, that existing network, expanding it gradually. And so we don't see this as monopolistic at all. In some sense, it's exactly the inverse of that.
Okay, so non-monopolistic, but democratization is what we are looking at. But I personally believe that social commerce in the present form perhaps is really leveraging the power of big tech, and one really can't deny that, at least in terms of Instagram, just owned by Facebook, or WhatsApp, again owned by Facebook. The last set of question really, and I have both of you, and Mohit, I can't let you go off without you answering this question. 2020 went by, the pandemic was what it was, really. I think the way we assess risk for almost all of us, India Inc., corporates, or VCs, will not be the same going forward. The meaning of risk will fundamentally change. All of us have been jolted out of our black swan blindness. None of us really factored in risk in this way. I want to understand from you that 2021 comes, January is around the corner. If you were to give me 2 or 3 key driving investable themes for next year, which you're doubling down on, what would those be? Social commerce, you can't name. We have discussed about 45 minutes in that. Besides that, the next 3 themes that you think you're extremely bullish on.
I'll pick 2 for you. One consumer and one enterprise. So first, in the consumer, I think the pandemic has certainly taught us all that while we were going through the worst ever health crisis, none of us wanted to visit a hospital for obvious reasons. And it gave rise to this whole aspect of remote healthcare, teleconsultations at its simplest level, but being able to sort of have, a scarce set of doctors service a, very large population using technology as the interface. We made a very exciting investment this year in a company that essentially uses sensors, things like glucose meters, things like weight machines, and fitness bands, to learn about you and your body and how it metabolizes certain foods. And by just simply sort of following you, they are able to create a artificial intelligence twin of you and your body, and are able to use that to actually reverse diabetes. And I kid you not, it's way too early to declare victory. but the science has gotten to a point that I can actually keep track of how your body reacts to different food groups and use that to essentially create health tech companies of the future that will allow doctors to have a much larger span of control in a much more automated, much more online way. And we're super excited about that theme to see when the internet devices, artificial intelligence meets healthcare, that mix is a very interesting set of companies and insights that comes out of it. So that's one. The second thing which I feel is India is going to really benefit from is India has obviously ridden the wave around services, IT services, I mean, really well. But now in this next decade, I think India is going to be the hotbed of enterprise software products, software that is built in India for the world. And as our SMBs in India, as our mid-market customers in India, as our large enterprises in India, start to use more and more software, there'll be a domestic market for it as well. But our Indian entrepreneurs have grown up being very global. And so lots and lots of teams are going after building software products for both vertical and horizontal needs for enterprises all across the world. And so the number of SaaS unicorns, as they call them, the number of software as a service companies in India, is you can count them on one hand today. But I expect that number to grow sixfold or sevenfold in the next 5 to 10 years as the number of SaaS companies from India explode and succeed.
Thanks, Mohit. That was very well laid out. I think you're the subject of social commerce. So, one trivia: if each of you have to name your favorite social media influencer, who would that be? I'll start with you, Radhik, and then get on to you, Mohit.
You're now putting me on the spot, Shrija, to see how many people I follow. I'm actually going to name someone who's not Indian. She's a French woman called Justine Leconte. And the reason I actually speak about her is because she's somebody who has a very interesting background. She's an ex-digital marketer who's now set up her own fashion business. Is now a designer and runs her own business. But I think brings together this fascinating amalgamation of history, fashion, business, linking them all together in the stories that she tells. And to me, is one of the epitomes of what I would look for in an influencer. Is actually somebody who's interesting and not just peddling products. And if I were to tie that back to the conversation we were having right now, it's about content and engagement, and then commerce off the back of that, honestly, as opposed to the other way around.
Mohit, what about you?
I'm going to pick a name that's my little 9-year-old's favorite. It's called the Beast. And I want to pick it just to point out, which I think is the impact of gaming on India, and India's ecosystem has been fairly low, but I think it's about to change. And this next generation is very deep into online gaming and is only sort of it's only growing, if you will, as a phenomena. And so there are a bunch of influencers, and when you say influencers in this world, it's actually watching other people play games. It's actually following how they sort of navigate these different games. That's become a massive fan following on places like YouTube and others. So Mr. Beast is my vote.
Okay, thank you, Mohit, and thank you, Radhika, for putting your time and energy to this. I think we had a very lovely conversation today. We unraveled various aspects of social commerce, and thank you for putting up this meeting. To all our viewers, watchers, and readers here, write to me at shrija.a@livemint.com for any questions or queries. And perhaps if we have enough, we can have Radhika and Mohit again the second dispatch on social commerce. Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, Radhika, for joining in. Thank you, Mohit and Radhika, and wish you all the best. Season greetings and Happy New Year. Thank you.
To you as well, to all your listeners. Thank you.